listener production.
Hi, Natarsha Belling with you and welcome to the afternoon edition of The Briefing. Coming up in our deep dive, new Australian research has found a link between sunscreen use and vitamin D deficiency. The landmark finding has again put sunscreen under the spotlight. We'll unpack exactly what this new research means and why experts say sunscreen is still an important defence against skin cancer. But first, let's check the afternoon headlines this Tuesday, the 16th of September. At least one person has been killed and 7 others have been injured, including a number of police officers, after a gas leak at a popular restaurant in Sydney's northwest. Emergency crews were called to the Haveli Indian restaurant at Riverstone this morning, finding a 25-year-old man unresponsive inside. He sadly passed away at the scene. 5 police officers and 2 members of the public were also taken to hospital after exposure to what authorities say were extremely high levels of carbon monoxide. All are reportedly in a stable condition. Here is New South Wales Police Assistant Commissioner Gavin Wood.
Police from Riverstone Police Area Command have attended the location where unfortunately the 25-year-old deceased male has been located. At that time, the 5 police officers have attempted CPR on that male to the point where they felt there was something probably a little amiss in terms of the environment they were in, including an odour. So they have taken the 25-year male from the restaurant area, continued CPR. Unfortunately, that CPR was unsuccessful. That male is now confirmed deceased.
The long-awaited guidelines of the social media ban for under-16s have been unveiled by Australia's e-Safety Commissioner. The guidelines will require social media companies to, quote, take reasonable steps to prevent those under 16 from creating or keeping an account or face penalties of up to $49.5 million. But many social media experts have already raised concerns whether these new measures, which come into effect in December, will actually work, flagging both TikTok and YouTube don't require users to sign in. I spoke earlier to Dr. Susan Grantham on Channel 7.
So yes, it is a false sense of security. It still comes back to us as a society and parents to make sure that our young ones are educated and critically thinking about what they're engaging with online.
And the chief executive of one of Australia's biggest retail groups has been sacked over an alleged relationship with a senior staff member. Super Retail Group, which owns Rebel Sports, Supercheap Auto and BCF, announced today that Anthony Herity had been terminated effective immediately. The decision follows allegations of a relationship between Mr Herity and the company's former head of human resources, Jane Kelly. The claims surfaced in federal court proceedings brought by 2 former employees who say they were dismissed after blowing the whistle on the affair. The $3.9 billion company's leadership upheaval comes amid international scrutiny of corporate bosses over workplace relationships, including the recent alleged affair between a CEO and the head of HR exposed at a Coldplay concert. Now it's time to get into our deep dive on the landmark new research that shows a link between sunscreen and vitamin D deficiency. We speak with lead author of the study, Professor Rachel Neale from QIMR Berghofer. Rachel, thanks so much for joining us. Tell us about your new research that shows a link between wearing sunscreen and vitamin D deficiency.
So one of the ways that we get vitamin D is by exposing our skin to the sun. That causes the production of vitamin D in the skin. And the same wavelengths in sunlight that make vitamin D are the same ones that cause sunburn and skin cancer. And sunscreen's designed to block those wavelengths. So it stands to reason that if we're stopping sunburn and skin cancer, we would also affect vitamin D production. But that hadn't actually been shown in humans in real life settings. So we wanted to look at whether or not putting sunscreen on as part of the normal daily routine, which is what we're advised to do, we wanted to see if that would affect people's vitamin D levels and increase their risk of being vitamin D deficient. And in fact, that is what we found.
So breaking down those numbers with your research, Rachel, what did it actually show?
We measured people's vitamin D levels at the end of a winter then again at the end of summer and again at the end of winter. So we had them putting sunscreen on for a whole year if they were in the sunscreen group, or we had another group of people who we put into a control group. And as we would expect, everyone's vitamin D levels went up between the end of winter and the end of summer. There's just more sunshine, so that's normal. But the increase in the sunscreen group was lower than the increase in the control group. And then they all decreased over winter, but the sunscreen group ended up quite a lot lower at the end of winter and were about 30% more likely to be vitamin D deficient at the end of winter after that full year of using sunscreen.
Were you surprised by those results, considering it was such a big difference?
Look, the actual difference in vitamin D levels was relatively modest. It's just that translated into this difference in vitamin D deficiency. I was a little bit surprised in that we don't need a huge amount of sunlight to make vitamin D in the skin. So I was a little bit surprised that the sunscreen had done such a good job of blocking vitamin D. I mean, the upside is that means people were putting on enough of it to probably get the skin cancer prevention benefits as well. So that's actually a good thing. But I was a little bit surprised that it had an effect on vitamin D. I was fully expecting to find that it didn't.
Rachel, there has been some research, or some may even argue speculation, about the importance of vitamin D and making sure we're healthy overall, including possible correlations between depression and mental health. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, look, I don't know about vitamin D and depression. There are no really high-quality studies that link vitamin D to depression. One of the real challenges is that we know that lack of time outdoors is associated with being depressed, and that exposing our eyes to visible light is important. So there's this conundrum of, is it the vitamin D or is it just spending time outdoors in the sunshine? And are people who are depressed less likely to go outdoors in the sunshine? So that's a bit difficult to unpack. Some people anecdotally say that they feel better when they start taking vitamin D, but it could be the placebo effect. So that's hard to know. What we do know is that vitamin D does play an important role in our immune system. So it seems to reduce the severity of infections and also reduce the likelihood of getting an autoimmune disease like multiple sclerosis. So vitamin D is important for that. Having said that, sunlight also has benefits independently of vitamin D. So vitamin D is not the entire answer there, particularly for autoimmune diseases.
So to recap, Rachel, why is vitamin D so important for us, especially with our health?
Well, if we get vitamin D deficient over a longish period of time, we reduce the strength in our bones. And so as we get older, we increase the risk of having conditions like osteoporosis and causing fractures. You do need quite low vitamin D for that to happen. So we're not suggesting everyone needs massively high vitamin D levels, but we know vitamin D is really important for our musculoskeletal health. And it's also important to ensure that we have optimum functioning of our immune systems, and may have other benefits as well, which is still kind of somewhat controversial.
So from this research, in the report, it recommended that if you do have vitamin D deficiency, that you should take supplements. Is that good for everyone?
So our research actually is not about what to do if you are vitamin D deficient. It's essentially saying that if you really consistently apply sunscreen as part of your normal daily routine to all bits of your body that are not covered with clothing. This is not just putting a bit of sunscreen on your face. This is covering your neck, your hands, your arms, really making sure that your skin is very well protected. If you do that, that does increase the risk of becoming vitamin D deficient. So people might like to consider taking a supplement. They're cheap, safe and effective. You don't need to see a doctor in order to buy a vitamin D supplement. So we can kind of protect ourselves from the sun while also ensuring that we don't become vitamin D deficient.
And just on that point, Rachel, this comes on the back of other research from other organisations this year that found there are a number of brands that are available here in Australia, some are actually locally produced, that actually didn't meet the SPF 50 plus rating that they almost advertised to customers. And now they're concerningly so are some people that are very sceptical about using sunscreen. What would your advice be?
Look, what I would say is that the randomised controlled trial, which is the highest level of evidence that showed that sunscreen reduces the incidence of skin cancer, actually used a sunscreen with an SPF of 16. So we all think that we're only going to get the benefits from using these very high SPF sunscreens, but actually the sunscreen with lower SPF values is beneficial, provided you're putting enough of it on your skin and it's on your skin and not in your bathroom cabinet. So I think there's sort of a little bit of hysteria over needing to have these really high SPF values. Having said that, it is concerning that we know that there will be some variability in SPF testing between labs, just the way the testing is done. And there's a lot of work going on to see if we can improve that. But the way testing is done, we would expect there to be variability. But it was surprising that a couple of those sunscreen had such a low SPF, and that is too low to be getting the benefits. So I think it's a good thing that this has made us become more aware of the need to ensure that all our sunscreens are sort of perhaps tested in multiple labs to ensure some verification of the testing, make sure the labs are accredited. And I think it's a good thing that for now, those low testing sunscreens have been pulled from the shelves.
So as we know, sometimes there's misinformation out there. What would your advice be? Because we know the serious danger of skin cancer and melanoma, especially here in Australia. What would your advice be to people if they want to make sure, especially that they're protected in the sun, that they don't get skin cancer, but also that they're okay with vitamin D, which we know is very important for our overall health?
Yes, so I would absolutely be encouraging people to still be making sunscreen a core part of their skin cancer prevention routine. I think it's also really important that we don't conflate sun protection with sunscreen. Often when I say to people, what do you think of when I say sun protection? They say sunscreen. And actually what I would like them to say is clothing and hats, which we don't have the problems with, which lab has the SPF been tested in, provided you've got a nice tight weave piece of clothing, it's going to be offering you good protection. And so I think people rely much too much on sunscreen. So it should be part of our core daily routine just to protect us when we happen to duck outside, stand at the cafe waiting for our coffee or whatever. But actually during planned outdoors activities, we're strongly encouraging people to think clothing and hats and not just sunscreen. So that's a really important factor. But then if people are doing all of those things and not exposing skin to the sun, which is what I would recommend, it's certainly what I do, then you do run the risk of being vitamin D deficient. So I would encourage people to consider taking a supplement. People take lots of other supplements, which have got less evidence for them. So if people are choosing a supplement and they're protecting themselves from the sun, then I would be choosing vitamin D as one that we know is important and that we know that we can end up deficient in.
Really appreciate you joining us, Rachel. Thank you so much.
No problems at all. Nice to talk to you.
That was Professor Rachel Neale. And that's it for this episode of the afternoon edition of The Briefing. We'd love you to subscribe or follow us on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast. And we'll be back in your feed tomorrow morning. I'm Natarsha Belling. Thanks for your company.